The M1 Abrams has been the United States Army's main battle tank for 45 years, longer than any predecessor in American service. Programs designed to replace it have come and gone. The tank remains. The interesting question is not what makes it lethal. Any well-armed tank can kill another tank on a good day. The interesting question is what makes it last. What quality in the original design kept absorbing heavier armor, a bigger gun, digital sights, reactive tiles, counter-IED jammers, and belly armor kits, decade after decade, without the Army ever needing to start again? The answer is visible the moment the hull is opened. From the left side, the Abrams resolves not into one continuous space, but into a set of separations. The driver is isolated in the nose. The crew is walled off from the ammunition. The turbine sits in a removable pack at the rear. Every dangerous thing has its own compartment, and between the compartments is room. The Abrams begins with a machine that was supposed to make it unnecessary. In the late 1960s, the United States and West Germany tried to build a common main battle tank called the MBT-70. It carried a 152mm gun and missile system, an adjustable suspension, an automatic loader, and a crew housed inside the turret. It was the expensive future, and it collapsed under its own ambition. By 1970, the effort had contracted into the austere XM-803, but the costs had not contracted with it. Zaloga records estimates at 3 to 4 times the price of the M60A1. Congress terminated the program in December 1971. What followed was not another reach for the future. It was a brief written by failure: build the next tank so the Army can actually buy it. In June 1973, development contracts went to General Motors and Chrysler. Both XM-1 contenders were low, angular, turreted, conventional in silhouette. Where they split was in the engine bay. General Motors used a diesel. Chrysler chose the Avco Lycoming ACT 1500 gas turbine. The modified Chrysler design was selected on November 12, 1976. The first production tank arrived from Lima in February 1980, and the type was classified as the M1 in February 1981. It was named for Creighton Abrams, the former armor commander who had pushed the program before his death in 1974. The tank that bore his name kept the human loader, kept 4 crewmen, kept a turret on a hull, and rejected the biggest gambles the MBT-70 had taken. Open the Abrams, and every design choice becomes a question of where to put the danger. The driver lies on the hull centerline behind a glacis sloped at 82 degrees from the vertical, looking through 3 periscopes across a 120-degree arc. He is physically walled off from the fighting compartment above him. If the turret takes a hit, he is in a different room. Above and behind the driver, 3 crewmen work inside the turret, gunner forward right, commander behind him, loader on the left. Most of the main gun ammunition sits behind them in the rear bustle, separated from the crew by sliding blast doors that open only when the loader reaches for the next round. Above that ammunition are blowout panels designed to vent an explosion upward rather than into the crew space. The design does not make the tank safe. It chooses a direction for catastrophe. Doyle gives the forward turret armor on the XM-1 as nearly 2 feet thick. The turret face is broad and boxy not because of styling, but because the Burlington special armor package, spaced laminates of steel and other materials over welded steel, needs volume to work. The XM-1 protection requirement was framed against 2 specific threats: the Soviet T-62's 115mm armor-piercing fin-stabilized round over a frontal arc, and the AT-3 Saga's shape-charge warhead. What met that requirement was not a single clever layer, but a thick, heavy occupancy of space. The human loader remained because the 4-man crew was part of the arrangement. The autoloading 3-man turret path had already failed as a development bet in American service, and the program that carried it had collapsed. The 4th man was muscle, reach, a mechanic, a guard, and a pair of hands when the tank was not firing. He also kept the turret roomy enough for what came next: larger ammunition, altered stowage, and the thermal and digital additions that would need somewhere to sit inside the armor. The Abrams chose people over mechanism in the one place where the MBT-70 had chosen mechanism over people. The turbine is where the arrangement exacts its bill. A gas turbine is a jet engine family device with the power taken through a transmission rather than thrown out as thrust. Both XM1 engines were rated at 1500 horsepower, but Zaloga notes that the turbine spent only about 30 horsepower on engine cooling, while the diesel required about 160. That difference bought compact power for a very heavy vehicle without surrendering the rear hull to cooling hardware. It also bought a machine that had to breathe. Doyle describes the air path: a sponson pre-cleaner and combustion air intake on the forward left grille, then a second pre-cleaner, then 3 filters called V-packs. Large portions of the engine deck are the cost of feeding a turbine that wants enormous volumes of clean air while driving through dust. Many early AGT 1500 failures were caused by dust ingestion. When the tank sat still, the turbine often had to keep running to power the electronics, burning about 10 gallons per hour. APUs were studied but not adopted as standard. The rear deck carries the turbine exhaust centered between 2 transmission or cooler outlets, with fuel fillers, fire suppression controls, and filter access collected around the same zone, not ornament or spare sheet metal, but a service bay drawn into the structure of the tank. The payoff lives beside the penalty. The engine, transmission, and coolers come out as one unit with a 5-ton crane. On the later M1A1, the transmission or cooler grills swing away to give strong access into the rear hull. In field photographs from Iraq and Afghanistan, the rear deck opens and the white-painted engine compartment becomes a working cavity. Doyle's maintenance captions show the AGT 1500 outside the hull with intake, exhaust duct, and coolers legible as a single-handled assembly. The Abrams powertrain was powerful, noisy, and thirsty, and when it broke, a crew could change it. The first Abrams reached service with a 105mm gun because the larger weapon was not ready. Doyle is explicit that the ability to mount a 120mm gun later was part of the original design philosophy. That sentence turns the early M1 from an incomplete first draft into a deliberately staged machine. On January 31, 1978, the Army approved the German Rheinmetall 120mm smoothbore for a future production version. The M1E1 Block 1 effort followed in June 1979. The American XM256 was delivered in April 1980, and the first M1E1 pilots appeared in March 1981, carrying modified stowage, revised fire control, improved armor, and an NBC crew protection system. The M1A1 was type classified in December 1984 and entered production in August 1985. At the physical level, the change lives in the turret. The 120mm weapon carries a larger, rounder bore evacuator, and the rounds that Zaloga describes at more than 65 pounds each changed the loader's work and the geometry of the ammunition path behind him. Firepower in this tank is not only barrel length and muzzle energy, it is the turret continuing to function after the ammunition becomes heavier and more awkward. Then the growth moved to the roof. The commander's independent thermal viewer had been wanted on the M1E1 but was omitted for cost. The design reserved a circular opening for later installation. A hole in the roof left empty on purpose, waiting for the budget to catch up with the architecture. That opening filled with the M1A2 program, approved on December 18, 1992. The first upgraded M1A2 was delivered in October 1994. The first SCP tanks followed in September 1999, carrying digital hardware, improved fire control, crew climate control, heavier rear grills, a silent watch battery system, and the CITV on the left turret roof. By the SCP generation, the tank weighed 68 tons, still riding the same 25-inch wide track. Each edition found somewhere to go because the original arrangement had left somewhere for it to go. The gun grew into a turret built to accept it. The site filled a hole cut for it a decade earlier. The electronics settled into a hull that had room because the turbine was compact and the crew compartment had not been shaved to save weight. Desert Storm tested the arrangement at scale before it tested it in combat. When the first M1 units reached Saudi Arabia in 1990, they were not the latest tanks at all. They were older M1 and IPM-1 battalions. By November, Zaloga records 580 M1 and IPM-1 tanks in theatre and only 123 M1A1s. What followed was not just a campaign preparation, it was a retrofit surge. 835 MAS were upgraded to heavy armor standard before the ground war began, along with fire control and NBC changes and desert repainting. By February 1991, the Army had nearly 2,000 M1A1s in Saudi Arabia, plus over 500 in war reserve stock. An Abrams battalion fielded 55 tanks. 36 battalions and squadrons went into the campaign. That is the scale on which the arrangement had to pay off. The air campaign wrecked Iraqi logistics before the ground offensive, and air-land battle training let the Abrams battalions move at a tempo the Iraqis struggled to answer. Thermal sights mattered. Fire control mattered. So did the fact that crews could work through a heavy battalion's maintenance needs in desert conditions without discovering that the tank had become hostile to field service. Crews still complained about fuel consumption and the need to clean air filters constantly in sand. The Pulse Jet air cleaner program that followed, beginning in 1995 and mostly complete by 2008, was the Army's answer. Not a new engine, but better filtration hardware bolted onto the same rear deck. Then the wars changed shape. In Iraq, by early 2005, about 80 Abrams had been damaged by mines, IEDs, and rockets and sent back to the United States for repair. The adaptations that followed read like more burden finding somewhere to live on the same hull. The ANVLQ-12 Duke counter-IED jammer appeared on the turret. GDLS received a contract for the first 505 Tusk kits in August 2006. The first version added AR-AT reactive tiles, 32 boxes per flank. Tusk II extended tiles to the hull and turret sides, adding over 3 tons. A separate 2-ton belly armor kit protected the crew compartment from blasts underneath. Ballistic shields went around the weapon stations. A tank infantry phone gave accompanying troops a way to talk to the crew without standing in the open. Thermal sights and remote weapon mounts accumulated on the outside until the Abrams in a TAL AFA patrol photograph looked nothing like the Abrams on a Cold War parade ground, but carried the same separated compartments inside. The tank that had been drawn for Soviet armor in open country was now shouldering an urban and route clearance load it had never been designed for, on the same tracks, around the same blast doors. Return to the opened hull one last time. A driver lies low behind the glacis. 3 crewmen sit inside a turret that keeps most of its ammunition behind blast doors, with panels above to throw violence upward rather than inward. At the rear, behind grills and access covers, the turbine power pack sits ready to come out as a unit when the machine needs to keep moving. 45 years of additions, a bigger gun, thermal sights, digital networks, reactive armor, belly plates, jammers, mine rollers, and everyone found somewhere to go on the same machine. What lasted was not a perfect tank. What lasted was an arrangement that kept making room.